Hello, good morning to you. And this is one of our sessions from this Lowit Legal Tech Summit 2021. And today we have the pleasure of having Alex Smith from iManage, as he's going to be talking about making knowledge work. And Juan, if you will please do me the honor of presenting Alex.
Sure. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you here. And again, Alex, thanks so much for accepting our invitation. Alex is the global product lead of AI at iManage. He previously worked as innovation manager at Reed Smith, and before that, in information product management at LexisNexis, working on providing knowledge and contract AI solutions within the iManage platform, connecting better through share information, better data, better search and analytics, and ultimately delivering better outcomes to the organizations and clients. Alex will talk about making knowledge work and how data, AI, and robots will not replace these professionals, but allow them to deliver better, more creative solutions in times of great business, technical, and cultural change. Alex will talk about how professionals will benefit from these new systems that are also vital to training them correctly to deliver the right ethical results. It's a great topic, and we're really honored to have you, Alex.
And
Okay.
without any further ado, Alex, it's your floor. Thank you very much for sharing all this knowledge with us, and we're ready to have you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So today I'm going to talk through how to make knowledge work, and talk around how machines and humans are going to work together more around institutional knowledge, and finding that knowledge and utilizing that knowledge in complex organizations. So So the agenda for today, I'm going to talk a bit about what we mean by knowledge work, talk about who these knowledge workers are, and this will pick up a little bit from my presentation last year at this same event, and then look at this kind of human-machine knowledge work combination. So what is knowledge work? We've done a lot of work here at iManage around what we mean by a knowledge work and a knowledge worker, and I think it's really important to understand the difference. I think we talk a lot about knowledge management, but actually the end user of knowledge management is often a knowledge worker. And those people are doing a lot of very complex work. And I think we get lost a little bit of time between what robots and machines can produce and forget to realize that there are actually humans at the center of this. And actually what people and clients and consumers of these services pay for is that intelligence that comes from those humans who are able to do things like reading between the lines, intuition, and things that, machines are, and I'll come on to this later, machines are going to struggle to do over the next 5-10 years, and so I think when we think about that picture of the robot or replacing a lawyer, I think, we are forgetting what knowledge workers do and what the best lawyers, professionals, compliance officers actually do. And I really like this quote here at the bottom saying, actually, we talk about, these robots and analytical machines and being more data driven, but actually a lot of what happens when when you get your best knowledge worker working for you is they often go back to things like playfulness, experimentation, they're listeners, they're trying to problem solve, fail fast and then try something else to try and find the right solution. And so ultimately, some of the things that we maybe have, kind of noised out as part of, being more data driven is actually kind of thing that you often pay these professionals for, or you want to pay them for. And I think it's really important to think about, what is it that you truly value about a trusted advisor, a lawyer, a accountant, or any other professional. And often it's not just, they deliver the thing precisely to set criteria, etc. It's often that creative side. And so what I think we will see is this kind of ability to and respect for that knowledge work, which is based on a bedrock of what, you know, AI data and things can deliver. But ultimately still, the best people, the best lawyers, the best professionals will be the ones who have these things like intuition and creativity. So I think we're trying to raise the game, or at least raise the playing field with data and technology. But ultimately, the thing that you want is this kind of end result of this intuition, this ability to solve the problem in front of you, and not all of that will be machine driven. So if you think about that, you know, what aspects are there of knowledge work? You know, so why you go to a professional is often that professional has information relevant to that situation. So that could be that you're going to that person because they're an expert on regulations, and they're an expert on understanding the situation with those regulations, how they're used in different situations. So ultimately, it's not just about I have information. A lot of people can have information, but is it relevant and how can it be applied? And then, just, as I said, you know, thinking about how that information is then applied to your situation as a client or as a user of these services. What could the unintended consequences be? What risks are involved? And understanding the wider stakeholders. And I think that's important when you look at, you know, kind of corporate law in those areas where you're really looking at how that's applied into complex organizations. And I think last time I spoke, I talked about how those complex organizations are also going through large cultural and market disruption, etc. So those stakeholders are often moving. So, you know, when we talk about knowledge work, we're not talking about, you know, kind of its ability to write a contract and how can you machine learn a contract. I think what we're talking about here is how you actually raise and get the most out of those knowledge workers and apply those to the situations you are trying to solve as a client, as a user of the legal services. And kind of following on that, you know, these people work in and for complex organizations and organizations which are part of systems. And I think if you kind of look at the bigger picture of what's happening about technological disruption, evolving technology, emerging technology, disruption from the large players or the emerging large players or disruptors who don't so much play by the rules as some of the tech companies that are out there, or the big supply chain changes. You know, these people are both working within, especially in the larger firms and the larger consultancies. They're working in complex organizations. They're working for complex clients. This isn't just, you know, a client turns up and says, I want this. You know, these are clients with their own stakeholders, their own change, their own structures, their own organizations, their own geographical organizations, where there's complexity of change, where, you know, these are not simple questions, they're not repeat questions. And where there's often, you know, large global systems at play, different legal systems, different supply chains, different, you know, laws and regulations. And I think, you know, kind of that was all happening before the pandemic. And obviously since 2020 and last year, you know, we're now seeing this as more of a, you know, what was probably a very mixed people and digital, or the beginnings of digital relationship has become very digital, forced digital over the last 18 months or so. And so a lot of this is about people trying to understand those connections. So when you're trying to do that knowledge work that I talked about, it's about how do you do that within the understanding of these complex organizations, both your own, if you're trying to deliver, you know, international multi-practice area work, or if within your client, where you're trying to understand their organization, what the client is asking, how it goes against other knowledge that you already have about that client, and how they've dealt with situations across their organization. Because I think it's important to realize that in large, complex systems and organizations, not everyone knows everything about what's going on. So often joining those dots and that knowledge is important. So who are these knowledge workers? So I'm going to touch upon the types of people, you know, we're working with around this question of knowledge. So, you know, I think I touch on and talk a lot about lawyers, but there are different types of lawyers. And obviously there are lawyers both sides of, you know, in the legal, in the law firm side, but also obviously a growing legal ops and in-house legal community who are kind of working together, hopefully increasingly, to do this kind of side. So, you know, obviously lawyers, you've got people, here's an example of a lawyer, they're advising and documenting deals. They're working in Word still predominantly, but they worry about a lot of the changing outputs that they're being asked for. And by which I mean, it's lawyers know well the Word environment, but they are struggling, and are sometimes fearful about, kind of words like, smart contracts, computer code, etc., and wondering whether Word is going to be the output forever. So, as we see these changing outputs, that they're thinking about this now. How are they going to deliver that legal advice in this more digital world? They fear that their organization doesn't necessarily have all the internal knowledge in to their fingertips, and I think one of the big changes that we've kind of started to see around knowledge within law firms has been around the not having the water cooler or corridor moment, or the ability to pop into someone's office and ask a question. I know that sounds silly, that you think, well, law firms have always had instant messenger, they can message each other, but actually that's been a big cultural change. And then that's kind of opened up a lot of questions about, okay, who is the right person? Why do we not have a system? Why can't I search this and find the right person? So, there has been an accelerator within COVID, because people have suddenly realized that a lot of what was native knowledge is now needing to be systematized or made searchable or applied within something like Teams, which has obviously been one of the big Microsoft Teams, which is obviously one of the big technical changes of the last, or pickups of the last 18 months or so. But they're also worried about the amount of data involved in legal matters. And this isn't just on the, what's a quite mature side on litigation, but it is now increasingly on the side of things like contracts, deals, M&A, etc. There is an increasing demand to make sure that legal advice, that stuff that's really valuable about what you should be doing, is embedded in a bedrock of understanding the data, understanding the organizational data and what's available, and worrying about how to find that, how to corral that, how to utilize it. It's fine to have a huge spreadsheet, but what's that spreadsheet showing you? So increasing worries around that within this lawyer. But equally, kind of there are other knowledge professionals, not just lawyers. So you have the compliance professional here who's trying to stay on top of complex advice that they're trying to give out to their organization. They're trying to track that organizational demand, and that whole side is going up, not coming down in terms of compliance. There's a fast moving world around regulatory change. We're not going to see less regulation over the next 10 years. We're probably going to see more regulation, especially as especially in the spaces of technology, how big, online supply chain, online e-commerce, marketing, especially if you're in a tech company, there's going to be a lot more tech regulation coming that largely hasn't been around until now. And they're also worried, I think, in this area, the data angle on this one is that, these systems that are coming out about AI, search, discovery, etc., that they're worried about what's going to be found in their corporate systems. What's going to be found about what's been happening in those corporate systems. So there is, again, a worry around data and trying to be ahead of the curve on that data. And then, we have accountancy as well. So, increasing complexity around the nature of taxation. Big change, I think, at the G7 the other day, talking around, kind of global tax rates and, kind of less kind of offshoring of taxes, etc. So really interesting, very pertinent current trend there, and action around, what's been kind of like what's happening about the nature of taxation. Again, like the lawyer, they're increasingly having to work with, international, multinational clients. So how do they understand that complexity across their own organization? Like who knows what in different teams, in the national teams who understand the national tax laws and tax approaches. They're working in complex organizations, often with, affiliated local expertise to meet that. And again, some of the worries are, obviously the positives are, maybe some parts of that tax can probably be more easily automated than some of maybe the more word-led lawyer side. But increasingly, they're also worried about data and what regulators will see and audit trails, etc. So again, there are concerns for these workers. So hopefully comes across here that I'm not just talking about lawyers, we're talking about different types of knowledge workers. But again, always, my original point's been absolutely key. It's about how they as a team, with other, professionals within their organization or professionals they reach out to, collectively use their knowledge to give this advice, come to the right outcomes, utilize data to be ahead of the curve rather than behind the curve on discovery within data. So when we talk again about the nature of knowledge work and data, actually I really like this visual. It kind of says, we spend a lot of time talking about, in corporates and in technology, we talk about being data driven, but what does that actually mean? There's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of data being generated every single day in Slack channels, in new spreadsheets and new documents being created, but it's just data, right? What you need to then understand is, what of that data has information? How do you start to categorize that into types of data? So you can start to say, well, what do I have on this type of data? And that's hard, especially given the channels where the data has been generated. And then you start to look at, what knowledge do we have, which is more starts to be, how do we connect that data together? So how do you build anything from analytical knowledge, where you're starting to look at things like, how many previous deals have we done in a similar way with a similar characteristic, still through to what is, the traditions of, say, knowledge management, which is creating, kind of knowledge assets, which can be utilized and linked, templates, precedents, best practice, process maps, how to do. But that's all fine on knowledge, but you kind of then going into this level where you can have information and knowledge at your fingertips, but what are you actually trying to do as one of those knowledge workers? And really, you're kind of then looking at, does that data have really interesting insights within that? What can I see about my client that's going to be really, really useful? Or what do I see about similar clients that's going to be really, really useful in terms of advising someone on a course of action? And then you're kind of getting through to that element of, where do you want to be as a senior lawyer, senior accountant, or that compliance officer? You kind of really wanting to be that person who's delivering wisdom and insight, I think, is where things are at. But obviously a lot, what we have to do with data is to clean it into that level where people have the first three at their fingertips. And then obviously the idea of having that information at your fingertips, having that connection of teams of knowledge workers that come together, that's when you really make impact. That's when you really meet your client needs. You really start making a difference in terms of things like international work and coverage and that kind of really cutting edge work that every lawyer and professional wants to be doing. So just kind of touching on some of those types of knowledge workers, and this is just a kind of almost a recap of what I spoke about last year. I think I had like 6 different types last year, and I'm just going to touch on about 3 of those. But you still see there is going to be this kind of advisory role, but now they're working in fast-paced digital environments. They're working with increased digital regulations. We're looking at people who really are problem solvers. So people who are curious and creative. They're often working closely with their clients. They're utilizing those kind of insights that we talked about a minute ago, whether that's driven by their knowledge or shared knowledge and connections to people, or driven through data. And they're often, kind of quite, I've kind of put cynical to some degree, but of the various tech developments, these are the people that have to advise on what's really happening in these environments. They have to cut through the noise and actually come up with, very, very cutting edge advice to their clients. And then I talked in the past about the transformation role. So we're looking at, lawyers and professionals who are good at transforming. They're supporting their industries with that change, really understanding what's going on in an industry. So again, not just the knowledge within their organizations, but the knowledge of what's genuinely changing in their industries, and what that actually means to the advice that they give. They're often involved in things like large restructurings of corporates. Again, something I probably talked about last year, but obviously accelerated through this massive change that we're going through, and obviously the consequences of that over the next couple of years in terms of like where people work, how they do that work, and obviously accelerating quite a lot of digital change to many businesses, which probably might have taken 10 years, but now is being started off now and probably a few years ago, but being accelerated now. But that's leading to large kind of restructuring. So these people are part of, they should be part of this transformation. This is the opportunity for those professionals. They're often systems thinkers, and they're often having to look at regulation and legislation and building frameworks for these organizations to work in. And then finally, kind of looking at kind of what I always get quite excited about, which is this predictive, preventative lawyer. So kind of almost saying, you know, can you start to move the word lawyer to more towards risk advisor, and start to say, you know, they're able to utilize data, they're able to utilize that insight, those trends that they're seeing, and in data and in both their organization's data and the organizations they work with, spotting those issues and being able to look and say, actually, I see a trend, I see something moving towards something. I see this as, you know, as being avoidable, as opposed to being after the event and something where lawyers step in after the event to solve the problem that's now been caused. Can we be more predictive about that? So often, you know, looking at the kind of skill set here, you know, being more forensic, investigative, and curious, but around systems, the design of those systems, the data in those systems, and starting to look and say, well, where my future BD is not based around, my future business development is not based around who I know, what we chatted about, what I think might be happening, but it's actually based around measuring the health in systems, understanding what is happening, where things are heading. An example here might be a lawyer who's advised around a type of contract, you know, maybe it's an employment contract. He suggested 4 or 5 different positions, but obviously over time, though, those contracts that they may have been perfect on day one will start to diverge, evolve, move. Business stakeholders want to change it. Instead of waiting for something to go wrong with that over time, you can start to see the trend of that employment contract that's been given to the employees, where it's heading, what's happening in terms, and starting to be predictive before things go the wrong way. So actually turning into that more risk advisor or preventative person. So kind of using predictive analytics almost to avoid traditional legal work and in many ways disrupt the way that legal work is done. So these are how I can see that. I've talked here about lawyers, but I think, you know, this kind of goes across those different professionals that I talked about earlier. So moving on to the kind of human machine knowledge work. So how does technology drive this knowledge work and create those connections and insights that I've talked about? So I think, you know, kind of one area, first area to talk about here, I've kind of got about 8 different areas. The first area is kind of around knowledge discovery. So I think we're seeing a kind of rebirth of interest in knowledge and knowledge management, but also kind of looking at that from different angles around not just best practice, but how to find that insight, how to find novel past work, how to start to build analytics around the types of work that people have done. Also allowing kind of consistency, and I'll touch on this in a few other areas around, you know, meeting the needs of some of these kind of things like accelerated practice with best practice, with project plans, and many of the areas like that. And what I find interesting here is that this isn't just in professions where we're seeing, when I look at, you know, kind of similar knowledge systems to the ones that we build here at iManage, I'm seeing knowledge systems and knowledge management of that information and that insight being applied in other domains. In my domain of technology, you know, the same, we have the same problems. We use multiple systems, we store things in multiple places. People write stuff in documents, they write things in wikis. All of that information is needed at different points in time. So we're actually seeing knowledge systems being created in multiple other industries, including technology. So this isn't just a, you know, like let's redo knowledge management in legal again. This is a trend across multiple industries. And I think that's really interesting. And a lot of it's around finding best practice and previous practice, and search being one of the big technologies there. Then I think you can see here, I kind of got in connecting networks. I think this is a big one. We see a lot of a demand around things like connecting expertise, connecting those experts to what their customers need through better understanding of customer need. Finding people in networks, you know, Microsoft didn't buy LinkedIn just to have a social media platform. They bought LinkedIn because it links together professionals and utilize, and how those professionals can be brought together on connecting systems. So, you know, the power of network has been one of the big things that's come out of social media the last 20 years. I think we're finally seeing it being applied to that kind of knowledge worker network, and trying to connect the right people together to work on teams, to work on matters, and projects, and knowing who you have in your organization, what's your bench strength, who's there and available, but not just doing it again through who you know and through your personal network, but actually systematizing that into these tools. Then I kind of flip over onto like the acceleration of best practice. And I think, you know, this is a trend in multiple industries, which I think some of the professions do. I think legal is increasingly doing, but it's around best practice, around efficiency, project management, process. So able to, you know, find best practice from previous work, how people ran projects, allow people to search for those projects and their characteristics, and then basically kind of connect people together on how to do those projects again better. And I think that kind of flips to one below there, kind of measuring what was good. So, you know, trends is a big area. What are the trends? What are common work? How can you compare like for like within an organization, like for like clients, like for like projects, like for like previous work? And then capturing that into, you know, kind of into comparative knowledge, so how you can compare those deals in systems. I think one on the top right there around discovery of risk, I think that's important. I think we've seen that through e-discovery and now increasingly into areas like contracts and other technical documents, which I'll touch on next. But ultimately being able to look in those systems and knowledge professionals understanding those systems and where risk might sit in a system, especially a system that's been tracked by data, not just, you know, the obvious canonical data like a contract, etc., but into things like people's tooling that they use every day. So, you know, Teams, where people communicate, email, where, you know, again, where they communicate, and where things are happening, but understanding how an organization works through its technology and where the risks may be. Think about that compliance person that we discussed a while back. How powerful is it for them to be able to see where people are compliant about within their own organization, who is following the policies, and where are there areas of risk in their organization? Contract lifecycle, I'm pretty sure you've had other talks around contracts and contract lifecycle and legal operations, but obviously a big area of interest to especially around the legal side and in the legal teams within corporates, being able to look into contracts, pull out data points and commercial data points as part of the process of creating and managing those contracts, and then starting to utilize the connections in those contracts which are being pulled out. So being able to show what might be at risk, what might be coming up for renewal, what might be utilized as part of a big deal coming up or a change in the organization, and also very importantly, you know, there's massive commercial opportunities in those contracts which organizations are leaving unlocked or unknown within those. So often, I think we talk about contract lifecycle in the realms of the legal team, but actually put that contract information in the hands of the business teams. There is a lot of commercial importance in those. And I think, you know, on the bottom right of this diagram is, you know, technical documents. You know, we talk about contracts a lot in legal, but in each industry there are different types of technical documents, not just contracts. So thinking about unlocking knowledge in you know, technical documents in pharmaceuticals or in other industries, as you know, in forms and in areas, you know, like financial services where there's a lot of forms. So we often obsess in this area about contracts, but often that data, that information, that thing to extract with AI can be in other types of technical documents, and cracking those and understanding the metadata in those. And then finally, just kind of, you know, I think there remains, and I hope, you know, we talked a lot about data here and technology, but I think, you know, one of the other areas is, you know, as we talk about that legal knowledge professional wanting to kind of increasingly do that higher and higher work, you know, more unique work, more high value work, you know, sharing of novel work within a knowledge system. How do people find not just the trend on how we did, you know, those standard doc matters, but where are the really novel matters? What were the characteristics of those novel matters? what's the cutting edge of advice, and how can organizations leverage, the amazing work of one knowledge professional who might be the leading expert in a certain area of regulation. How can you share that across your organization and do more of that work? Because as I said, there are areas of, new regulation. There's going to be a lot of, regulation around new technology, regulation around what's gone wrong with existing technology, especially as some of the big tech companies get regulated in the US and other areas. So that actually that novel and cutting edge information is vital. And how do you share that? And how do you not just have individuals being those experts, but actually share that amongst teams and find that together? What's interesting is actually, if you look at a large organization, a large law firm, a large consulting firm or accountancy firm, they probably want to do bits of all of this. And so ultimately, again, I'm sure you've had talks around, multifunctional teams, bringing the right people together, connecting the right groups to do this different types of work. It's a combination often of all of these, but often with a focus on certain areas. So if you're in kind of low value work, where you want to cut a profit, you might focus a lot around acceleration of best practice. If you are a legal team trying to change the way you work, you're going to focus potentially around something like contract management, contract lifecycle, improving that area. But obviously, there are different goals of different organizations, and those organizations may have different areas, different practice groups that want to pull on these levers in different ways. And underneath this, you can map a lot of the different technologies. Discovery of risk will be a lot around some of the AI stuff, the search angle, the kind of the successor to kind of e-discovery area, and using that tooling and organization. But you look at something like best practice and measuring what was good. That's kind of going to come into your process-led pieces, your lean approaches, and sharing how things have been done in the past, how you can improve things. And then, again, you can probably pin different needs against different ones of these. And so kind of what is this kind of new knowledge that technology is opening up? Technology like search, like knowledge graphs, like analytics, like AI, like extraction, and process analytics as well. What do these allow us to do? And this kind of sort of diagram I use to try and explain the different aspects of what I mean by the word knowledge. And a lot of it's from connecting knowledge together, from linking people to topics, lawyers learning from current matters and processes, extracting knowledge, not just rewriting it, or rewriting best practice, creating those dynamic process maps, those process checklists, measuring that efficiency against that, but doing it through a data-driven way. Benchmarking where things like contracts are we using the best benchmark? Are we using the best position? Are we using current best practice in my industry, in my organization? Leveraging the data that you're starting and organizations are starting to try to manage better. I think one of the big things about AI at the moment is a lot of organizations are actually doing a lot of data cleanup at present. They're trying to clean up data. They're trying to clean up what they have, and to allow them to do the things which they want to do with AI, like, compare deals, compare matters, compare projects. All of that's involving data classification, data cleanup, putting things into less and less systems to manage that data. And then you kind of see things like, mining insight from firm, market, industry best practice to try and drive that, understanding of the market, what your clients are doing, obviously driving the information that you have about clients in your organizations and trying to connect that together into meaningful insights. And then seeing, kind of these new roles, and this is a bit, to me, it's a bit of an old diagram, but we have things like knowledge engineers, legal architects, obviously the legal ops people. They're all trying to do this information, how to pull together the right knowledge at the right time in the right matters to drive the right outcomes. And so this is how I see underneath all the technology that we talk about. And I'm not really going to touch a lot on the types of technology. I work in search, I work in data extraction, I work in knowledge graphing, trying to connect these things together, looking at how we bring in data from other sources and other systems to give this kind of singular view of data, and then allow users to find that, or connect people together. But ultimately, these are kind of the outputs that people are trying to do in this knowledge arena. And the idea being that, as a knowledge worker, I don't need to understand this. I just need to look at the kind of desktop that I go into, this search engine that I use, the application on my phone that I'm going to use at the point of need when I'm going to see a client in a taxi, or I'm about to hop on a Teams call with someone. I just want the outputs of this, because ultimately I need to see this, because I'm then going to make those decisions, and that build that layer on top that we discussed, which is what people want their knowledge workers, their lawyers, their accountants to do for them. And so ultimately this is what, happens behind these systems, how, ultimately they're trying to connect these systems together. They're trying to connect data points together. They're trying to generate those data points in the first place, so you can start to connect things together. And then ultimately within those connections, think of this is what the likes of Facebook, Google, Amazon have underneath their systems, and underneath the way that they've disrupted businesses. And organizations want to provide their knowledge workers with similar connections of information, obviously applied to a different domain of regulations, past work, past advice, who works at the organization, what their specialisms are. So really trying to connect that information together and build those vivid systems. I would say still, at present, a lot of organizations struggle because they have different information, different systems. But what we do see now is organizations understanding data architecture, understanding data structures, understanding where there are gaps in data, and trying to look at their systems and building the right systems. And then obviously when you start to do this piece, often people say, well, why, aren't we going to replace things with robots and robo law, etc. We're still in this process of trying to get to 40, 60% where machines can do some of their aspects, and actually where do humans add that value and that real depth. And this is a diagram we often use around contracts, and say, look, you can get quite a long way with this technology. This technology has evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. This is real technology, not hype. But ultimately, you're still needing humans and those knowledge workers adding that extra value, reviewing, adding, understanding complex points, understanding complex positions, understanding risk because of what's coming out. So ultimately, we are allowing the humans to work in that really high value end. And I think that 100% automated is a very, very long way off, if at all. And obviously this gives an opportunity for lawyers and knowledge professionals to actually really drive what they do, knowing that the technology is doing that kind of left-hand side of this diagram. And then that kind of moves into different types of, systems and tooling that people are using. So using things like search, which I touched on, generating and delivering a point of need know-how, and not just here's a know-how system, go to it, but we can actually start to deliver know-how at point of need in a Teams chat, in contextually in your search, contextually on your phone, wherever it might be, but that knowledge can be delivered in a better way. Creating actionable data, so pulling data out of things like PDFs and Word documents and contracts and technical documents and presenting it so that people can use it and cut it and start to play with that data, or moving that into analytics and monitoring and things like dashboards. Here you can see how you can start to use that data and provide that information to at the fingertips of business users, not just lawyers and professionals. So ultimately, looking at better outcomes and time to do more valuable work, what we really want people to be doing is not doing that grudge work through of, loads of paralegals crunching through contracts, trying to find certain points that need to go into a spreadsheet, trying to do that work which really, really frustrates people and also frustrates buyers on the cost of legal work. But ultimately, we want to be providing data to those knowledge workers to actually be able to give that hugely valuable advice that positions how to do things differently, that creative side. And I think we have to be really open about, kind of where things are at over time. I think we spent about 5 years now on the latest round of, kind of AI hype and what it might be able to do and pictures of robots, etc. But it does have limits. And I think that's coming out both in terms of lawyers using this in the real world and, people using the real world, but also in that kind of ethical area of, what does it do really? You've trained it on that type of data, or is that really the type of data you need other data to train it better? I think we're in the reality of understanding that world. And I think we're realizing that is a human machine balance in terms of then how we build how we build advice or you know, M&A work or corporate work out, and actually understand that balance in a more nuanced way. We understand that data always needs interpreting. You can give people thousands, millions of data points, but the best lawyers will see analytics as a starting point, not an end point, for an interesting conversation, for an interesting risk, for an interesting piece, something that could be prevented. I think the hard challenges for computers, as we kind of look into the just AI as a general, not just in our industry, are the ones that lawyers are very, very, you know, kind of valuable at, you know, understanding intent, understanding why regulations need to be in place, why laws need to be in place. And I think we'll see a lot of fallout of the last 20 years of technology and the big tech giants. We're going to see a lot of fallout over the next 10 years around privacy and how data was used, business models, advertising, and that's going to lead to more regulation and again, another great opportunity for lawyers. As I said, I think, you know, more regulation will come out. And then I think, you know, we are seeing early interesting areas around computable law, but it's a very long way off. There's a lot of system change to make that happen, even on kind of the early ends of, you know, kind of legislation as code or law as code. We're at the beginning stages, and that's going to touch a lot of systems, and they aren't just legal systems. They are the systems of parliaments. They are the systems of you know, of policy, of how governments run, etc. So that's a long play on that kind of computable law. So I think the things that people can really look to do now, look to connect organizations through your organization through technology, connect expertise through data, build that knowledge sharing muscle that can be you know, surfaced in these systems. Understand that each new piece of work generates more data, which would have value to the rest of your organization, to the way you do matters and projects in future. And really understand how to measure that and understand the value of those connections and how you are empowering those lawyers and measuring that empowerment. And then I think obviously, you know, the client and the world that the consultants and lawyers work in is important. And actually, I think that what we have now to hand in terms of data and technology will allow people to kind of look at knowledge outcomes and outputs that are valuable to those clients and measure those. Make them more actionable into your clients' systems and their businesses. Realize that legal work's not just a memo, it's something that needs to be actionable. And then obviously realizing that legal output should be part of your clients', you know, institutional knowledge and muscle. So actually the outputs that law firms provide should be actionable, should then go into how those businesses, you know, input it into their systems, use that system, measure that system, and then potentially share it back with your lawyers. So I think, you know, kind of let's understand the limits that we have, but actually it's a really exciting time because we have abilities to now do things that the last 5 years or so of understanding the hype, understanding that it is a human machine process, understanding where knowledge workers are hugely valuable and computers will struggle to get to, but realizing actually, I think that what machines can do in terms of providing data that is a starting point for interpretation raises the game, and a lot of current legal work and even consulting work be valued in a different way because of this. And so ultimately, you know, kind of just try to put a visual on this, but, you know, you can see how you can go, you know, as a lawyer or as a business professional in a law firm, as a corporate legal, as an accountant, you can start to look at how you sort of connect your institutional knowledge in your own organization with the know-who of your connections and network in that organization, understand the projects you work on and the matters, understanding the outputs that you provided to clients, and then obviously look at, you know, kind of how you connect to your clients' networks and your industry networks that you work in with that kind of expertise and insight, and how you share knowledge and how you share that, and those knowledge outputs change as well. So, you know, I see this as a kind of matrix and a grid and a world of connections, and that technology is well known. And what we're trying to do is connect that data and provide those outputs, remembering that these knowledge workers really don't want to know the how, they just want to have this at their fingertips when they run a search on their internal system, when they look on their phone, when they open up a new matter or project in Teams, they want this stuff pushed towards them. And obviously it's similar in the client's world. So that's me. I hope I've touched upon a lot of interesting kind of areas. I hope I've been realistic about where things are real and where some of the limitations are. And also kind of, you know, followed on from what I discussed at this conference last year about the types of workers who are coming through, those kind of analytical lawyers, those predictive lawyers, and understanding how they can get their hands on this kind of technology, but also realize where, you know, you build that partnership between the humans and those multifunctional teams, which I'm sure other people have spoken about, and these systems and these explainable systems to build up this kind of data muscle, both within your own organization and within your clients' organizations that you obviously work or people work within all the time. So I'll leave it there and hand back to the team. Happy with that?
Yes, thank you, Alex. It was a great guidance on what's happening out there in the AI world, and definitely lots of very valuable information that our audience can definitely re-study this lecture and just take it one step at a time. There's a lot of things happening for sure. And I don't know, Juan, if you want to make any final comments. And
no, I think it was great, Alex. We really appreciate it. Don't worry, we will send the link to all the participants. They will get it as if they had seen you last week.
Yeah.
And we're really happy that you were able to join us today, and it's truly an honor, and to have iManage again with us is a tremendous asset. So thanks a lot.
Yeah.